This is the New Indian special series from Moscow. And today we have the honor of having with us Kirill Babaev. He's one of the biggest intellectuals, a polymath, a wizard, a prodigy. In fact, his resume is so long that it's probably going to take the whole program to mention what all he has done. But I'm going to mention a few. He is at the moment Doctor of Philology, Professor, Acting Director of the Institute of China and Modern Asia of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Dean of the Faculty of International Economic Relations of the Financial University under the government of the Russian Federation, first Vice President of the Alpha Group Consortium. In fact, he is one of the biggest leaders of the young Russia. Welcome to Reason, the New Indians platform, where we get to the reason behind the issues that concern you. Welcome to Reason, Mr. Babaev.
Thank you very much.
We will begin this conversation on history. Since you are a historian, you've written articles and books as well. I would like to know that if you agree with the point of view that America is an empire in decay and it's being replaced by the new Chinese empire.
Well, that's not quite a correct situation description for me, because I would rate this current situation in terms of civilizations. The Western civilization has grown since probably 500 or 600 years already and becoming a world power itself. The Western civilization where both Russia and Europe and the United States belong to. However, the current point of growth of the world civilization lies in the east and in the south of Eurasia. As far as I understand the current situation, we see that the economies of China, India, some other countries of Southeastern Asia are growing very fast, and the technology is growing very fast, and probably the whole understanding of the future of the humankind is also growing there, while the Western world is somewhere in decay, as you rightly said it, and probably they are currently they are starting to hold their inertia more than developing themselves. This is why we are speaking about the growth of the East.
So when you say inertia of the West, what exactly do you mean? And if you agree that there is a decay, what are the important factors that have led to this decay and inertia in the West?
In my opinion, the West has grown into the position of being the world power, and it once understood, it realized that it's the world power forever. However, it's not the case, because the Earth is much wider, much bigger than just the United States and Western Europe. So they understood that everything should be in accordance with the Western rules of doing business, of doing politics, of social structure of the society. However, this is again not the case, because other opinions, other points of view are started to grow, to rise everywhere in the world. So nowadays it's time to reconsider the European leadership, the Western leadership, and probably look at other parts of the human civilization in order to understand what their values are, what their senses of the future, their understanding of the future is, in order to see what's the progress of the humankind.
But tell me, is Russia a part of the West or the East?
That's a very complicated question in the history of our country, because Russia, you know, the national emblem of Russia is the eagle with two heads. One is directed to the west, one is directed to the east. And this is where Russia has ever been. So we are now rebalancing our policy, our economy, our economic and international relations towards the east because of the problems, the conflict with the west. We are now starting to look more and more attentively to our neighbors in the east and south, including India and China, and are trying to build new relationship with those countries in order to probably benefit from the new technologies and new points of growth of the world civilization. This will help Russia to be a balance between East and West. And even though we're still a part of the European civilization and culture, we will be happy to establish more tight relationship with the East in order to benefit from it.
So essentially you're saying that Russia is part of the Western civilization, but it's also, in a way, a bond with the East. It's, in fact, sitting right in the center of the East and the West. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, exactly like that. Even though it was born in the West, it was born as part of Europe and has been for centuries a part of the European culture and history. But ever since Russia has began to expand to the East, it became a neighbor of those rich and very interesting civilizations such as the Central Asian civilization and the Chinese one. So it began to reconsider its future and its cultural heritage in order to benefit from both parts of the world, and which is a very interesting balance, a very interesting mixture, which will probably make our country richer in a global understanding.
Well, before I actually push you further on this, because clearly the West hasn't approached Russia in the terms that you are describing. In fact, I remember that President Putin did offer, in fact, to be part of NATO, and that request was not accepted by the West, by the NATO countries. And but before I come to this question, I want to understand from you, since you have worked on China, you are also an Orientalist. I would like to understand, what has China done in the last 32 years that it has now begun to, in fact, contest the position that the West has been holding for last 500 years, as you rightly pointed out? The American economy today is $25 trillion. Chinese economy is a $20 trillion economy. What has China done in just last 3 decades that it is now almost very close to America? How is it that China has made it this economy, such a massive economy, in just 3 decades?
Well, I would say that that's not a unique situation in history. Because, for example, around 100 years ago, it was Japan, which made the same actually breakthrough to the Western world and became a superpower by the beginning of the 20th century. We saw probably very similar cases in South Korea, in Taiwan, and those the so-called Asian tigers, which are developing very, very fast. We see that India is now developing much faster than China in terms of economic growth. So we see that these cases are possible. However, in China, I think that there are 3 secrets that help them to manage this kind of economic growth, this breakthrough. The first one is political stability. The second one is long-term planning of their economic growth, of their social growth and technological progress. And the third one is Western investments. Because we all know that in the end of the 20th century, Western Europe and the United States began to invest in China. Vast sums of money, and a lot of money has been thrown into the Chinese economy to make it richer and richer. So that was the foundation of the Chinese growth as well. So I think that it was a very wise path of building the economic growth and the help of the Western investments that made the Chinese miracle possible.
When you say political stability in China, you're essentially saying the Chinese Communist Party has been in control. It's a one-party system. There's no idea of democracy in China. It's a closed society in many ways. And it is very different from the democratic West. Are you saying that a totalitarian or a dictatorial system ensures stability?
Well, as of now, we can definitely say that the autocratic rule in China has allowed them to bring long-term stability to the people and to the economy, and to allow them to plan for decades ahead. So this plan has helped them to create a strategy. However, this kind of strategy is definitely not possible somewhere in a European country where parties change rule and go into opposition every 5 or 4 years, or even more often than in Italy, for example. So this is definitely a factor that helps the country to establish long-term strategies of economic growth. However, there are different, I would say, kinds of democracy in modern understanding. One of them is definitely multi-party system. The other one is some kind of a democracy is a discussion within the one single party and the fractions inside of it. This is also a kind of democracy that exists in China because discussions are also made there. And there are a lot of disputes within the Chinese leadership now as of where the Chinese economy will go further. So this is a kind of discussion which also creates some kind of exchange of opinions and makes the final decisions more adequate.
So are you saying that democracies have failed and it's the autocratic system that the Chinese follow, that one-party system brings political stability in a nation as big as China, and this is the way forward? Would you say that democracies have failed?
I would say that democracy is a very wide term which covers a lot of various variants of how the countries may develop their political system. You know that the term was born back in ancient Greece, and since then it has been modified many times. It's being modified now because the world is changing, we are changing, so we are trying to change our opinion, our understanding of what democracy is and what it might look like. In Russia, the state also says that we have a democratic system, but some people in the West object to it and say that Russia does not have a democracy at all, or China has no democracy at all. But you know, can we call a democracy a system, for example, where 85% of the people support the power, support the government? Can we call it a democracy? This is the rule of people, they say. And 85% of the population supports this point of view, so we can also call it a democracy. However, we can discuss on how these figures are achieved and so on. So this is a very interesting question because a discussion has been longing for decades about what democracy is and how it may look like in the future. However, we have the reality. In China, the economy is growing, the technology is also developing very, very fast, and probably the current classical understanding of democracy will change because the people are starting to see the impacts of this Chinese understanding of democracy in action.
What is Russian understanding of democracy?
Again, this is quite a complicated question because in Russia we also have a kind of one-party system because the single party, which is called the Joint Russia, is huge actually and is a ruling party. It has the overwhelming majority in the parliament. We have some other small parties which form the opposition. However, this opposition is quite weak in order to take the most important decisions in the country. However, the majority of people, according to any polls that you can make here, either Western or national, show that the majority of the population support the ruling party. So what we can do about it? It may be the result of the lack of discussion, it may be the result of the right strategy selected by the ruling party. However, it's the fact. The people support the party, the people support the government and what they do. So they call it a democracy and we cannot object to it.
President Xi Jinping has made himself president for life in China. Do you think that is something that people have chosen him to be? Do you think that is a version of democracy?
Well, in China, you make it a little bit more simple than that it is in reality, because first of all, President Xi Jinping is not a unique person who takes decisions in China. It's a country where collective rule of the so-called political bureau is very, very important. It's the same system as existed in the Soviet Union, for example, about 3 decades ago. It's the same in China now. There is a group of people, there is a whole elite with which any kind of leader should be in very, very tough and close touch in order to continue ruling. We all expect that the following forum of the Communist Party of China in October will probably prolong the rule of President Xi Jinping. However, this is not what he does with his own decree. He is not the only person who...
So you're saying that he's been chosen by the people?
I think he's definitely chosen by the elite.
So does really the elite represent an entire nation, whether it's in Russia or China or elsewhere?
It's very hard to define.
What is the elite?
Because the political elite in China is definitely the party itself. It's very easy to say. However, what the real intentions of the people are, how we can define on that? We can make sociological polls, we can make surveys, we can make some kind of scientific research in it, but it's not, any results might be objected to, because, for example, the current opinion of the people may be the result of propaganda on the TV or something like that. So it's not easy to say what people really want. However, if the political stability is promoted by the government, it means that the population is at least content.
So why is it difficult to know what people really want? I'm going to make a case for India as a democracy, for example, that we have different political parties. They come up with their manifestos, they come up with their policies, they go to people and they seek votes. Now, you may say that there is propaganda being done by political party A, political party B, but that propaganda right is for everyone. Everyone is allowed to do that propaganda. But at the end of the day, it's the people who get to know what is in the manifesto, what the policies of a political party is or is not, and they decide whom they are going to elect. Won't you agree with me that this democracy is really about what people want?
Well, it's very hard to say that, because, for example, we see much more propaganda in the West nowadays than somewhere in Russia. I can see that because I visit Europe very often, and I can see the difference between how it looked like, for example, even a year ago, or a couple of years ago with the situation with Ukraine and Russia and so on. We see that the propaganda in the West is very, very strong, unfortunately so.
But we don't really know what is happening within China. We don't know what China is doing in Taiwan. We don't know what China is doing in Xinjiang, where they say that they have put Muslims in concentration camps to rewire their minds against Islam. We don't know what China is doing with, for example, in South China Sea. So when you say that there is propaganda in the West and the Western democracies, well, on the other side of the aisle, we have a country about which we know nothing.
Well, I wouldn't agree to that because, for example, here in this institute, we are researching China every day, and we definitely read their social networks, we communicate with the scientific circles, we carefully read all the analytic discussions that is going on in the Chinese society. So I think we know pretty well what is actually going on.
But why doesn't world get to see? Why doesn't world get to see? So you as a specialist, you who are invested in the intellectual content being created out of India, of China, but general public don't get to know.
Well, that looks as if the people are not quite interested about what is going on, because actually what we know about China, we definitely publish it in our scientific publications, in our articles, in our monographs. But this is more for those who are really interested. Unfortunately, in Russia, the interest to China and the Chinese situation in general is only now growing. But it was very weak even a couple of years ago. So I think if we look more attentively, we can understand what is going on. And
tell us, while looking at your art of war, are there any clouds of war in Asia? Is China planning to invade Taiwan? There is a speculation that they might invade Taiwan and integrate it with the mainland China.
I think China is definitely not interested in any kind of a military conflict around Taiwan at the moment. First of all, they have their party forum very, very close, and they have this kind of prolongation of President Xi Jinping's rule probably will happen this autumn and will be confirmed by the Chinese parliament this winter. This will all make it absolutely impossible for China to launch any kind of offensive or any kind of military conflict. And in general, China is not interested in any kind of military conflict because of the economic ties with the West. You know that the West is still the largest trade partner and economic partner of China, so they wouldn't want to spoil all the relationship with the United States and with Western Europe, and definitely any military activities in the Taiwan Strait will ruin their relationship with some of their neighbors because they will be quite scary about what China is doing. So I think China is interested in the peaceful solution of the matter, of the issue. But the issue is definitely there. And I think it's the Western countries which are now provoking kind of tensions, military tensions around.
Why do you think the West is provoking China?
Because they haven't ever done so much activities around Taiwan, verbally and actually.
Why is the West needling China? Just because they are doing these military activities, is that good enough reason to provoke China?
They say it very frankly. The United States are now building their strategy on trying to prevent China from developing politically and expanding their influence to Asia. So they say it very openly that we need to prevent China from developing their political influence, and this is why they are trying to initiate.
They have in fact called China as the biggest threat to the world. They have said that China is a rival and is a threat to the Western world order.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they say.
World order. So, but at the same time, you know, what you said earlier, that China also sees West as a friend. China would not like to disturb the relationship that it has had with the West. In fact, as you rightly pointed out, it's because of the West and the cooperation and the help that they got from the West that China was able to grow in the last 3 decades or so. So, what exactly is the nature of relationship? Is this relationship between China and the West a relationship of hostility, or is it partnership?
Well, as far as I understand the current situation, China is very much interested in preserving economic relations with the West, both Europe and the United States. They are trying to achieve peaceful situation in both Europe and Asia in order to continue their staggered economic growth and trade relationship with the West. That's what they're trying to do. However, there is a second matter very important to China. China needs to be unified. The whole world knows that there are two actual powers, China and Taiwan, but the majority of the countries in the world, they only think that there is one China, this is the People's Republic of China, and that the country should be unified one day. So the Chinese want to do it in a peaceful manner. How it might be done and when it might be done, it's still unknown, but no one needs the tensions and definitely no one needs the military conflict around that.
Okay, it's understandable that China does not want a military confrontation with the West. But with India, it has shown all the signs that it is okay with having a military confrontation. It engaged India in a standoff in the northern Union territory of Ladakh. There is an issue over Arunachal Pradesh as well. And it's only recently that there has been a disengagement of troops on the line of actual control in Ladakh. What exactly is China trying to establish here? No military confrontation with the West, but in the immediate neighborhood, whether it's India or South China Sea or even Xinjiang, where they say that they have put Muslims in concentration camps to rewire them, reprogram them against Islam. At the same time, they have a long-standing issue with Dalai Lama, the Tibetans in exile in India, and also recently in Sri Lanka with the collapse of Sri Lankan economy. It seems that China is all right with having confrontations in its neighborhood and through Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative. It seems that it has an ambition to aggressively build an empire and control at least Asia or furthermore.
Well, in this situation, our interest is definitely to use any tools that can be used, economic, social, international negotiations, but military conflicts. And I think China understands well that any military activities anywhere with their neighbors will only harm the reputation and the image of the country and the trade relationship and the projects they have in the economic field. I think they understand it very well, and actually their efforts in establishing good economic relationship with Asian countries, we definitely saw it very recently at the Shanghai Organization Summit in Samarkand, where the Indian and the Chinese leaders shook hands with each other and looked quite friendly, with the Russian president as well with them. So this is a good format in order to resolve all the issues that there are between the countries. Issues are arising everywhere, even between the countries in Central Asia. We see that there are some border issues and military issues and so on. But if the countries are in the same organizations, as India and China are in BRICS now and in Shanghai Organization also, they can resolve all their issues that are standing in front of them.
So, one last question. I see the Art of War on your desk. Tell our audience, are you seeing any signs of war in Asia or the rest of the world? We already have one war going on in Ukraine, but we will leave that aside. Are there further clouds of war hovering over Asia? Look at the art of war for us.
That's right, yes. You know that this ancient work, The Art of War, was actually written in China many centuries ago, and it says much more about negotiations and about peaceful resolution of conflicts than about the war itself. And the most important thing, the most important idea of the book is that you need to win the war without war. I think this is a good lesson for all the governments in the current world. I think we are in a very low position now, in a very low point, and probably in the nearest future, the countries which are now in conflict will understand that they need to start negotiating with each other, because every issue, even political, historical, economic, and so on, may be resolved with negotiations at the table of negotiations. That's what the art of war tells.
So you are essentially saying that in the era of the Chinese Empire, we are going to see more peace and less confrontation.
I hope there will be no empires and all the nations will be quite equal and sitting at the same table, negotiating in the common interest.
So that's multipolarity.
Absolutely. And that's what exactly the art of war needs to say.
Well, thank you for this enlightening conversation. We have had a great time talking to you today. Thank you, viewers, for watching us.